I am Jarvis, your storyteller. Welcome to the Science Fiction Exploration. If you like the story, please subscribe to our channel. The Outsider's Arrival. The gleaming spires of Stellar Academy pierced the lavender sky of Europa, their crystalline surfaces reflecting Jupiter's massive form looming above. 11-year-old Zena Brighton pressed her forehead against the transport shuttle's window, her heart thundering in her chest. She could already feel them, hundreds of minds brushing against her consciousness like leaves in a digital wind. "Remember what we discussed, Zena," Professor Callisto whispered beside her, his holographic form flickering with concern. "Your abilities must remain secret until the right time. The galaxy isn't ready to know that humans have evolved quantum empathy." Zena nodded, tugging at her regulation uniform's collar. The weight of being the first, and only, human to develop the ability to sense and influence emotions at a quantum level felt heavier than ever. She'd spent years training with Professor Callisto's AI consciousness to control these powers, but this would be her first real test among other beings. The shuttle docked with a gentle hiss, and Zena stepped into the Academy's main atrium. Her breath caught at the sight of countless alien species moving through the space, floating gas clouds containing sentient minds, crystalline beings that chimed as they walked, and creatures that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions at once. "Well, look what we have here," a voice like breaking glass rang out. "They're letting in smaller and smaller pets these days." Zena turned to face a towering figure whose body appeared to be made of living amethyst. Vexthor, she recognized from the student profiles, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the Academy's unwritten hierarchies. Around him, other students quickly scattered, their fear rippling through the quantum field like dark waves. "I'm Zena Brighton," she said firmly, fighting the urge to reach out and soothe the anxiety flooding the atrium. "I'm here to learn just like everyone else." Vexthor's crystalline face fractured into what passed for a smile. "Learn? What could a primitive organic possibly teach us? Your species barely managed interplanetary travel a century ago." The quantum field around them darkened with mockery and superiority. Zena felt it pressing against her mental shields, threatening to overwhelm her carefully maintained control. She clenched her fists, remembering Professor Callisto's warnings about revealing her abilities too soon. "You might be surprised," she replied quietly, turning away, but Vexthor wasn't finished. A crystalline arm shot out, blocking her path. "Here's your first lesson, little human. Know your place." The quantum field surged with hostile intent, and for a moment, Zena's control slipped. A pulse of pure empathy radiated from her, invisible to normal senses but powerful enough to make Vexthor step back, his crystal surface vibrating with confusion. What was that?" he demanded, but Zena was already walking away, her heart racing. She'd let too much slip, revealed too much too soon. Behind her, she heard Vexthor's followers whispering, their consciousness rippling with uncertainty. She'd managed to keep her abilities hidden, but she'd also made a powerful enemy on her very first day. As she followed the holographic guide to her quarters, Zena caught fragments of thoughts and emotions from passing students. Curiosity, fear, disdain, and underneath it all, a deep loneliness that seemed to permeate the entire academy. She realized then that she wasn't the only one hiding something, wasn't the only one who felt like an outsider. Professor Callisto's holographic form materialized in her room. "That was dangerous, Zena, if they discover what you can do too soon." "I know," she interrupted, watching Jupiter's storms swirl through her window. "But maybe that's exactly what this place needs. Someone who can truly understand how everyone feels, someone who can bridge the gaps between species." The AI was silent for a long moment. "Perhaps, but remember why you're here. The Cosmic Council believes humanity is ready to join the galactic community as equals. Your success or failure here could determine that future." Zena nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle onto her young shoulders. Around her, the quantum field pulsed with the combined emotions of hundreds of beings, all trying to find their place in the universe. Just like her. "I won't fail," she promised, both to herself and to the future she represented. "But I'm going to do this my way." In the corridors outside, Vexther's crystalline form glinted as he watched her door, his consciousness clouded with suspicion and wounded pride. The battle lines were drawn, though only Xena could see them in the quantum field of emotions that surrounded them all. The real test was just beginning. Breaking point. 3 weeks into her time at Stellar Academy, Xena found herself spending more lunches in forgotten corners of the quantum physics lab. It wasn't just Vexther's increasingly aggressive attempts to prove human inferiority. It was the constant storm of emotions that battered against her mental shields. Every grudge, every fear, every moment of anger in the academy hit her like physical blows. Today, she sat cross-legged behind a particle accelerator, sharing her lunch with Pip, a tiny plasma-based life form who had become her only friend. Pip's emotional signature was simple and warm, a welcome relief from the complexity of other students' feelings. "You can't hide forever," Pip's voice crackled like static. "Vexther's telling everyone you're afraid of him." Xena sighed, watching Jupiter's swirling storms through the lab's window. "I'm not afraid. I just can't risk losing control. You don't understand what would happen if." The lab door slammed open with enough force to shake the delicate equipment. Vexther's crystalline form filled the doorway, flanked by his usual followers, a gravity manipulator named Drax and Twin, a being that existed in multiple parallel dimensions simultaneously. "Found you, little human," Vexther's voice rang with malicious glee. "No professors around to hide behind this time." Pip stretched into a defensive barrier of plasma between Xena and the bullies. "Leave her alone, Vexther. She's done nothing to you." "Nothing?" Vexther's surface fractured with patterns of rage. "She exists. Her whole species exists, playing at being our equals when they're barely more evolved than the bacterial colonies in Europa's oceans." The quantum field around them darkened with his hatred, and Xena felt her shields straining. Each wave of negative emotion threatened to crack her careful control. She stood slowly, hands raised. "This isn't about me, is it?" she said quietly, catching glimpses of deeper pain beneath Vexther's anger. "Your people lost their homeworld when the quantum storms came. You blame the human colonies for not helping in time." Vexther's crystal surface went completely still. How could you know about that?" "Because she's not what she seems," Twin's multiple voices echoed in harmony. "We've all felt it, the strange disturbances in the emotional field around her. She's hiding something." Drax moved forward, the gravity distorting around his tentacles. "Let's find out what our little human is concealing." The pressure of their combined hostile intent slammed against Xena's mental barriers like a tidal wave. She stumbled back, feeling her control beginning to slip. Equipment started floating as Drax manipulated the gravity field, turning the lab into a dangerous maze of flying objects. "Stop," Xena warned, her voice shaking. "Please, you don't understand what you're doing." "Understanding isn't the point," Vexther advanced, his crystal body singing with cruel satisfaction. "Putting you in your place is." A piece of lab equipment struck Xena's shoulder, sending her sprawling. Pip tried to intervene but was dispersed by one of Twin's dimensional shifts. The quantum field around them roiled with dark emotions, hatred, fear, superiority, all pressing against Xena's crumbling defenses. "I said stop." Her control shattered. A wave of pure empathic energy exploded outward from her small form. The quantum field lit up like an aurora as every emotion in the room was suddenly shared between all present. Vexther staggered as he felt the echo of his own cruelty. Twin's multiple forms wavered as they experienced the fear they'd been inflicting. Drax's gravity field collapsed as he was overwhelmed by the complexity of shared consciousness. For one brilliant moment, everyone in the lab was connected, feeling what the others felt, understanding what drove them. Then Xena managed to pull her power back, collapsing to her knees as the quantum field settled. Silence fell. The floating equipment crashed back to the ground. Vexther's crystalline surface had gone completely transparent with shock. What are you?" he whispered. Before Xena could answer, alarms began blaring throughout the academy. On every screen, urgent messages flashed. Quantum anomaly detected. Security protocols engaged. "I'm sorry," Zena managed to say as Professor Callisto's hologram materialized beside her, his expression grave. I couldn't hold it back anymore. The truth was out now. As security drones converged on the lab and her fellow students stared at her with new fear and wonder, Zena realized there was no going back. She'd have to face the consequences of her revelation, whatever they might be. The quantum field around them still echoed with the aftershocks of shared consciousness, and in those echoes, something had changed. The barriers between species, built of fear and misunderstanding, had begun to crack. The hidden truth. In the aftermath of the lab incident, Stellar Academy's Grand Conference Chamber had been converted into an emergency hearing. Zena sat alone at its center, surrounded by hovering platforms filled with Academy officials, security drones, and curious students. Jupiter's massive form dominated the window behind them, its storms reflecting the turmoil within. This is unprecedented, Dean Quantum, a being of pure light and mathematical equations, pulsed with concern. No human has ever displayed quantum empathy abilities. The evolutionary gap is too vast. Professor Callisto's hologram flickered beside Zena. Perhaps it's time they knew the whole truth. Zena nodded, feeling the weight of countless eyes upon her. In the upper galleries, she spotted Vexthor and his friends, their consciousness still bearing traces of the emotional connection they'd shared in the lab. Even Pip had reformed, their plasma form glowing supportively from a safe distance. 7 years ago, Zena began, her voice steady despite her racing heart, humanity received a visitor. They called themselves the Quantum Architect, a being from the earliest days of the universe when consciousness and quantum mechanics were one and the same. The chamber erupted in murmurs. The Quantum Architects were considered myths, stories told to explain the inexplicable aspects of cosmic evolution. But Zena continued, her words carrying clearly through the space. They saw something in humanity, a potential that even we didn't recognize. The ability to bridge the gap between physical and quantum reality. They chose me as proof of that potential. Dean Quantum's light dimmed with disbelief. You expect us to believe that a quantum architect altered your genetic structure. Not altered, Professor Callisto interjected. Awakened. The potential was always there in human DNA. Zena is simply the first to manifest it. In the galleries, Vexthor leaned forward, his crystal surface refracting with intense interest. The memory of shared consciousness had changed him, though he struggled to admit it. Show them, Professor Callisto encouraged gently. Zena stood, closing her eyes. This time, instead of fighting to contain her power, she let it flow naturally. The quantum field around her became visible to everyone in the chamber, a breathtaking aurora of emotional energy connecting all present. The architect showed me that the greatest barrier between species isn't technological or biological, she explained as gasps echoed through the chamber. It's emotional, the inability to truly understand each other's experiences. She focused, and suddenly every being in the room could feel an echo of each other's emotions, not overwhelming like in the lab, but gentle, controlled. Dean Quantum's light flared with surprise. Security drones wobbled in confusion as they registered emotional data for the first time. This is why they chose our species, Professor Callisto explained. Humans, for all their technological limitations, have an extraordinary capacity for empathy. Zena represents the next step in that evolution. Then why hide it? Vexthor's voice rang out, genuinely curious rather than antagonistic for once. Why pretend to be ordinary? Because the galaxy isn't ready, Zena turned to face him. There are those who would see this ability as a weapon, a way to manipulate and control. The architect warned that humanity needed time to understand and accept this gift responsibly. The quantum field rippled with the weight of this revelation. Dean Quantum's form sparkled with rapid calculations. This changes everything. The implications for interspecies relations, for conflict resolution, for the very future of galactic society. It changes nothing, a new voice interrupted. Ambassador Void, a being of pure darkness representing the Galactic Security Council, materialized in the chamber. This human child represents an uncontrolled variable in galactic society. She must be contained, studied, controlled. The quantum field darkened with fear and suspicion. Security drones moved closer to Xena, their weapons humming to life. Professor Callisto's hologram began frantically transmitting distress signals. But before anyone could act, something unexpected happened. Vexter stood. "No," his crystal voice rang with authority. "You didn't feel what we felt in that lab. This isn't a weapon to be controlled. It's a bridge we desperately need." Other students began standing, Pip, Twin, even Drax. Each had been touched by Xena's gift, had experienced firsthand the power of true understanding. Ambassador Void's darkness rippled with anger. "You don't comprehend the danger. If humans develop this ability en masse." "Then maybe we'll finally have peace," Xena interrupted softly. "Real peace built on understanding rather than fear." The quantum field pulsed with possibility as more and more beings in the chamber began to feel the truth of her words. The future hung in balance, waiting for the galaxy to choose between fear and understanding. And in that moment, watching former enemies stand in her defense, Xena knew the quantum architect had been right about humanity's potential. The real question was the galaxy ready to embrace it? Rising storm. The days following the hearing transformed Stellar Academy into a battleground of ideology. Ambassador Void had sealed off the station, claiming quarantine protocols, but everyone knew the real reason. No one was allowed to leave until the Galactic Security Council decided what to do about Xena. "They're afraid," Vexter observed, his crystalline form catching the light as he paced Xena's quarters. The former bully had become an unlikely ally, his experience with shared consciousness changing him fundamentally. "The councils built their power on keeping species separated by their differences. Your ability threatens that." Xena sat cross-legged on her bed, monitoring the quantum field that pulsed through the academy. Fear, anger, and hope swirled in complex patterns as students and faculty chose sides. "They're planning something. The emotional signatures around the security forces are getting darker." Pip buzzed nervously near the ceiling, their plasma form flickering. "We intercepted communications. They're bringing in telepathic dampeners, technology designed to suppress psychic abilities." "They don't understand," Xena sighed. "Quantum empathy isn't like regular telepathy. It's woven into the fabric of reality itself. Trying to suppress it would be like trying to turn off gravity." The door chimed and Twin phased through it, all their parallel forms vibrating with urgency. "They're coming. The Council's forces are mobilizing." As if on cue, alarms blared throughout the academy. Ambassador Void's voice echoed through every speaker. "This is a security directive. All students are to return to their quarters immediately. Resistance will be met with force." Xena stood, feeling the quantum field darken with approaching danger. "They're not just coming for me. They're going to try to wipe everyone's memories of what happened, of what they felt when we were connected." "They can't do that." Vexter's surface crackled with anger. "Those experiences are part of us now. They changed us." Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor. Through the quantum field, Xena sensed dozens of minds focused on a single purpose: containment at any cost. "We need to get you out," Pip darted to the door. "The maintenance tunnels." "No," Xena's voice was quiet but firm. "No more hiding." She reached out through the quantum field, touching the minds of every student and teacher who had stood up for her at the hearing. In an instant, they were connected again, but this time the link was steady, controlled. "I understand now," she said, both aloud and through the quantum connection. "This was never just about me. The architect didn't choose me to be unique. They chose me to show what's possible when we truly understand each other." The security forces breached the corridor, their heavy boots thundering against metal floors. But they stopped short at what they found. Hundreds of students had emerged from their quarters, forming a living barrier. Species that had been historical enemies stood shoulder to shoulder. The quantum field pulsed with shared purpose, shared understanding. Ambassador Void materialized at the head of the security force, their darkness roiling with fury. "This is your final warning. Stand down or face the consequences." "You still don't understand," Xena stepped forward, Vexther and her friends flanking her. "You can't stop this with force. The more you try to suppress it, the stronger it becomes." The ambassador raised a hand, and the security forces leveled their weapons. "Then you leave us no choice." What happened next would be debated in galactic histories for centuries. The security forces fired their telepathic dampeners, expecting to sever the quantum connections between the students. Instead, the energy was absorbed into the quantum field itself, amplified by the combined consciousness of hundreds of beings united in purpose. The resulting quantum cascade was like a supernova of pure empathy. Every mind on the station, from the highest-ranking council member to the smallest maintenance drone, was suddenly, irrevocably connected. Every fear, every hope, every dream and memory flowed between them. Ambassador Void staggered, their darkness flickering as they experienced for the first time the very emotions they had sought to suppress. The security forces lowered their weapons, overwhelmed by the shared consciousness of those they had come to contain. And at the center of it all stood Xena, no longer trying to control or hide her gift, but letting it flow naturally through the quantum fabric of reality. The barrier between species that had seemed so insurmountable began to dissolve, replaced by something new, a shared understanding that transcended physical form. As the quantum cascade subsided, leaving everyone forever changed, Xena looked at Ambassador Void with compassion. "Do you understand now? This isn't an ending. It's an evolution, one the galaxy has been ready for all along. We just needed someone to take the first step." The ambassador's form solidified, but differently than before. The pure darkness was now shot through with threads of light, physical evidence of how profound the change had been. The rising storm had broken, not in destruction, but in transformation. And in its wake, the true power of understanding began to bloom. Unity's dawn. 1 month after the Quantum Cascade event, Stellar Academy had become something entirely new. The rigid hierarchies and species divisions that once defined its halls had transformed into a vibrant tapestry of cooperation and shared understanding. In the central garden dome, Xena sat surrounded by floating crystals, a gift from Vexther that captured moments of shared consciousness like living memories. "The quantum architect would be proud," Professor Callisto's hologram observed, watching students of different species working together on a quantum physics project. "You've done more than just reveal humanity's potential. You've started a revolution in how species interact." Xena touched one of the crystals, watching it glow with stored emotional energy. "I didn't do it alone. Everyone had to choose to embrace understanding over fear." Across the garden, Vexther was teaching a group of younger students, human, crystalline, plasma-based, and others, how to recognize and interpret quantum emotional signatures. His own crystalline form had evolved, becoming more translucent and responsive to the emotional energies around him. "Breaking news from the Galactic Council," announced the Academy's information systems. Every screen lit up with Ambassador Void's transformed image, no longer pure darkness, but a dynamic swirl of light and shadow. After extensive deliberation, and in light of recent events, the Council has approved the Quantum Integration Initiative. All educational institutions in the galaxy will now include training in emotional awareness and cross-species understanding. Furthermore, humanity has been granted full membership in the Galactic Alliance. Cheers erupted throughout the Academy. Pip zoomed through the air in excited circles, their plasma form creating celebratory fireworks. Twin existed in so many parallel dimensions of joy that they created a prismatic light show. "But that's not all," the ambassador continued, their voice carrying a warmth that would have been impossible before the cascade. "Stellar Academy has been chosen as the first quantum integration center, with a mission to identify and nurture emerging quantum empathy abilities across all species." Xena felt a surge of emotion through the quantum field, pride, hope, excitement, and something deeper, a sense of possibility that hadn't existed before. "It seems," Professor Callisto smiled, "that the galaxy was more ready for change than anyone suspected. They just needed someone brave enough to show them another way. Brave enough to be themselves," Vexthor corrected, approaching with his students. His crystalline surface rippled with friendly light. You taught me that, Zena. Strength isn't about dominating others. It's about having the courage to open yourself to understanding them. The quantum field pulsed with agreement as more students gathered. Each carried their own story of transformation. Former enemies become friends, old prejudices dissolved in the light of shared experience, fears transformed into bridges of understanding. But this is just the beginning, isn't it? Pip asked, settling into their favorite spot on Zena's shoulder. There's so much more to explore, to understand. Zena nodded, looking out at Jupiter's swirling storms. Somewhere out there, the quantum architect was watching, waiting to see what would grow from the seeds they had planted. Already, reports were coming in of other humans manifesting quantum empathy abilities. Other species, too, were discovering their own latent potential for deeper connection. The architect told me something before they left, Zena said, standing to address her gathered friends. They said that the universe isn't just made of matter and energy, it's made of possibilities. Every moment is a choice between division and unity, between fear and understanding. She reached out, letting her gift flow freely through the quantum field, connecting everyone present in a gentle web of shared consciousness. In that moment, they all felt it. The infinite potential that existed not just in humanity, but in every species, every individual who chose to embrace understanding over isolation. We're not just changing the academy, she continued, feeling the truth of her words resonate through the quantum field. We're changing the story of what's possible when different species come together. And this story, it's just beginning. Above them, Jupiter's storms painted ever-changing patterns across the dome. A reminder that the greatest transformations often come from the most turbulent beginnings. The quantum field hummed with the combined hopes and dreams of hundreds of beings, each contributing their own unique note to a symphony of unity that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. In the end, an 11-year-old girl's courage to be herself hadn't just stopped a bully. It had opened the door to a new era of galactic evolution. And as Zena looked at the faces of her friends, both old and new, she knew that this was the true power the architect had seen in humanity. Not the ability to connect minds, but the wisdom to understand that in our differences lie the seeds of our greatest strength. The story of the quantum cascade would be told countless times across the galaxy, but its message remained simple. True power isn't found in domination or control, but in the courage to reach across the void and connect with those who seem most different from ourselves. For in that connection lies the future of not just humanity, but of all conscious beings who dare to choose understanding over fear.